Hello, everyone, and welcome to iCritic Live. This is the podcast where we talk about entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. I am your host, Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time with me today. And we have two topics to talk about today. Two kind of reoccurring topics. One isn't exactly news, but I want to cover anyway. And one that definitely is news and definitely needs some clarification on why it is happening. And for those of you who want to know what the topics are, we will be discussing Coyote versus ACME one more time, and we will be discussing the Disney proxy shareholder, as Disney's great-grandchildren and grandchildren have basically thrown in their support with current CEO Bob Iger to continue to lead the Disney company. And we're going to talk about why they might have done this and why it is important, and maybe some things that Disney fans should kind of keep in mind, because I know Iger is a polarizing figure. But first, we're going to talk about Coyote versus ACME. Now, I do not need to explain the situation again, other than to say the long and short of it is that Warner Brothers is taking a movie that, at this point, everybody wants to see. I almost don't know anyone who hasn't heard of this situation and doesn't want to see it at this point, but they are shelving Coyote versus ACME for a tax write-off. This is a very controversial thing. I personally believe this is an evil thing, and also, even though it is legal, it seems like it should be illegal. But I mean, we're going to talk about that later this week, because here's a little bit of a spoiler. We are going to have a guest star next week from someone who actually worked on the movie, and we are going to be talking to him about this whole situation. So I'm going to save my opinions for that particular episode. However, one of the actors from the movie has actually made a statement on it. And this isn't just some, with all due respect to, extras and side characters who worked on this movie, but this is an actor that has a name. His name is Will Forte. And Will Forte, well, you've probably seen some of his movies. He has been in such movies like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Strays, MacGruber, The Last Man on Earth, Nebraska. He was excellent in Nebraska. So, he's kind of a big deal, and he was in Coyote versus ACME. And he has finally made a statement on Instagram and X, and maybe possibly Facebook as well, about the cancellation of the movie. And I'm going to read the letter in full. And he said, and by the way, he opens this, in my opinion, very cleverly, to the cast and crew of Coyote versus ACME, because he is acknowledging that while we fans lose out on the ability to see this movie, and we lose in that scenario, but the people who worked on it, they're the ones who have suffered more than anyone else. So he says, to the cast and crew of Coyote versus ACME, I know that a lot of you haven't gotten a chance to see our movie, and sadly, it's looking like you never will. When I first heard that our movie was getting quote-unquote deleted, I hadn't seen it yet. So I was thinking what everyone else must have been thinking. This thing must be a hunk of junk. And by the way, we're going to pause there for a second, because some people might go like, well, don't you know it's a piece of junk when you're watching it? And the thing is, sometimes, no, you don't. Movies aren't filmed in a day. They aren't filmed in order sometimes. Sometimes the ending is shot first, and then the beginning shot later, or sometimes they shoot multiple different endings. An actor doesn't always know what the movie's going to look like until they see it, just like us, so that explains that context. Now, continuing. But then I saw it, and it's incredible. Super funny throughout, visually stunning, sweet, sincere, and emotionally reticent in a very earned way. As the credits rolled, I just sat there thinking how lucky I was to be a part of something so special. That quickly turned to confusion and frustration. This was the movie they're not going to release. Look, when it comes to Hollywood business stuff, I don't know blank word about blank word. Even when a movie tests very well, like ours, there's no guarantee that it's going to be a hit. Side note, this is true. People who say that audience will come out to see a good movie if it's good, well, they weren't around for The Iron Giant. And they weren't around for a lot of movies, but continuing. At the end of the day, the people who paid for this movie can obviously do whatever they want with it. It doesn't mean I have to like it. I blank hate it. Or agree with it. And it doesn't mean that this movie is anything less than magnificent. You would be so proud of it. A movie that should be seen, but won't. Please know that all the years and years of hard work, dedication, love that you put in this movie shows in every frame. That's all, folks. Will Forte. Now, this was a very diplomatic email because here's what he's doing. He is calling out the studio for doing this. He's doing it in a way where it's like, look, I know it's your movie and you can technically do what you want with it, but I don't like it. And that doesn't mean I'm ever going to like it. And everyone who worked on this movie, you did a great job. You made a great movie. I love it. I can't believe it's not going to be released. So he's calling out the studio and highlighting what a good movie this is without burning too many bridges. Now, he is so far the most profiled person who's worked on this project to speak out. This could strain his relationship with Warner Brothers. And here's what's going to be interesting. First of all, does this suggest that the movie's permanently deleted? No, actually, this suggests that the movie is kind of still in limbo, actually, but that he seems to have talked to people at Warner Brothers, and they have kind of assured him that they're shelving it. They're not going to release it, and there's not much he can do. So he doesn't have a whole lot to lose at this point. But it does put some pressure on them to do something with this movie. Now I would like to see what happens if, like, John Cena comes out and says something about this. You know, John Cena is bigger than Will Forte is, and Will Forte is pretty big, all things considered. Would Warner Brothers really want to jeopardize their relationship with John Cena going forward? Now, James Gunn, who executive produced this thing, hasn't said anything either. And I wonder if he will, because he's got the most to lose. He could get fired from Superman. He could lose his position at DC. It depends how much he actually wants to see this movie get released. If I were James Gunn, personally, I would negotiate with the next movie I direct with them. Hey, don't delete this movie. Because if my next movie that I make for you makes X amount of dollars, then it will trigger a clause where you have to pay the government back the money that you received from this, and you have to give this a release of some sort. He could maybe do something like that. I don't know. It would be nice if James Gunn spoke out about it. I don't think he will. Again, he has the most to lose. And look, I know we as fans can say, do the right thing. Do this for everyone. Do this for the art. And it's like, yeah, we're asking them to jeopardize their job and their livelihood so that we can see Coyote versus ACME. And that's a big ask for anyone. Do I think the movie will get leaked? I'm actually cautiously optimistic it will. I think there's too many people who don't want this to disappear that it will leak at some point, but we'll have to see. Now, whether it should or not, that might be discussed on the podcast next week. In the meantime, let's move on to our next story, and this is by far going to be the big one for a lot of my viewers because I have a lot of Disney fans who listen to this podcast, and God bless them. They are the most vocal. Whether they are agreeing with me or disagreeing with me, they are by far the most vocal fans, and I love them for it. I love them for it even when I'm not agreeing with what they are saying, and even when they do say something, because obviously it's fun when someone says, I agree with what you said, and then when someone says I disagree, it's like, okay, that's fine. I like having differences of opinion. I like discussing things. Well, there is a proxy battle going on at the Walt Disney Company right now. What a proxy battle is that basically it means there are some people who want seats on a board of a big company so that they can influence the board to make certain changes for a company. Now, in this case, it's an activist investor named Nelson Peltz and a second guy whose name, honestly, I can't remember. I'm sorry. It's Nelson Peltz is the big guy. He has been bugging Disney for a seat on the board for years and years. And he's finally been buying enough shares and getting enough people on the side to try to oust Bob Iger from his second stint as CEO. And before we continue, I do want to state up front, I'm not really a Bob Iger fan anymore. Some people think that I am because I defend him on things. But defending someone's decisions and putting things into context doesn't mean I agree with those decisions or that I like the guy. I do have issues with what he does. I mean, now here's the thing. I know he's like I disagree with him on the sense that, you know what, I think he does a poor job of preserving Disney history. I think he focuses way too much on franchises. I think he expanded the company to be something that it's really not supposed to be anymore. And the fact that Disney is struggling right now and he doesn't really know how to get out of it because he only knows like two things, franchising and buying stuff, and Disney suffering. I mean, look, a Maleficent 3 got greenlit under his watch because Iger, it's like, well, look, his line of thinking is, well, if these franchises are failing, what other franchises can we turn to? What else can we make a sequel out of? And that kind of thinking is coming back to bite not only Disney, but a lot of other companies. I mean, when you look at the state of DC and Marvel, I mean, it's clear that people are ready to take a break at the very least. At the same time, I am not blaming him for, buying things like Marvel and Star Wars. I'm not blaming him for making those movies. I mean, people say, oh, they should have never bought Marvel. Why? Why not? Marvel makes a lot of money, and honestly, when you look at that when you read the MCU book about the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there is a lot that studio has in common with building the Marvel Cinematic Universe as with Walt Disney building Walt Disney Studios. I mean, you might think it's sacrilegious, but like Walt Disney, Kevin Feige and Ron Perlman and the people who ran Marvel, they put a lot on the line to make Iron Man. And, reading that book, it was just so fascinating. It was like, it almost was like the modern day Disney story. So Marvel belongs at Disney, and Marvel movies make a ton of money. And, most of them are good. Not all of them, and they're not all great. But there's a lot of Marvel movies that I really like, and it's like, I'm glad I've seen them. I'm glad they exist. Do they make too much? Yeah, of course they do. I don't need the Marvel TV shows. I don't need the Star Wars shows. And, even though Star Wars has definitely stumbled recently, and I get flack for this, I think The Last Jedi is the best Star Wars movie. Yeah, I said it, and I still say it, and I still get hate mail for that comment. So I understand, even if I think Disney is basically struggling because Iger's strategy is no longer working. And that's why we change leadership up once in a while, because sometimes you need a fresh new set of eyes to look at the company. And I think there is a balance where it's like, look, you can make the Marvel and Star Wars movies, and that's the guaranteed money to fund the original films. And that's just a lesson that Hollywood needs to get into. Hollywood just got so into making nothing but blockbusters that once those blockbusters started failing, then it became a problem. I might have to talk about this in a separate podcast where it's like movie studios used to release 20 films a year because they were like mid-budget films, and most of them were hits, some of them were not, but now I'm getting off topic. So let's talk about the board fight. So Nelson Peltz is trying to get a couple seats on the board, and here's the thing. A lot of Disney fans, especially classic Walt Disney fans, are all for this because it's like anything to stick it to Iger and to push him aside, that's a good thing. But I've kind of been telling people it's really not that simple, because even if Bob Iger should go, you don't want to replace him with someone worse, like they did with Bob Chapek. Bob Chapek is worse than Bob Iger, and the best comparison I can use it to, and you can probably stream this episode of The Simpsons on Disney Plus, is when Sideshow Bob ran for mayor for Springfield. And make no mistakes, if you're a fan of The Simpsons, you know that Mayor Quimby is an awful mayor. He's a terrible mayor. Like, how that guy keeps getting reelected, I have no idea. But one season, he had a opponent running against him, and it was Sideshow Bob, the guy who tried to frame Krusty, is constantly trying to kill Bart, wants to, bomb Springfield, things like that. And it was one of those situations. I remember Lisa even, like Homer said, oh, well, you got to vote for the lesser of two evils. And Lisa says, well, in this case, Mayor Quimby is the lesser of two evils. And that's the situation we're with now. Bob Iger, much as you don't want to admit it, is the lesser of two evils in this case. Like, Nelson Peltz And I say this as a shareholder. I've been buying stocks for years. I actually read the annual reports. I don't know how many Disney fans actually do that, but I do. And Nelson Peltz has not actually provided any guidance for what he would do to improve Disney. His whole shtick has been, Bob Iger sucks. Elect me, I'll fix everything. And well, not to get political, but if anyone remembers the election between Bush and John Kerry, that was basically John Kerry's stance. I'm not Bush, so vote for me and I'll fix anything. And it's like, well, that's not a stance. That's probably why Bush won a second term, because John Kerry really didn't tell people what he would do to be better than Bush and to improve on policies that maybe Bush had failed in. And this is Nelson Peltz's thing. He is not actually explaining what he's going to do. And in fact, judging by his history of how he has done corporate raids at other companies, his whole thing might be to buy the company, dismantle it, and sell it for parts. Now, some Disney fans are okay with that because they don't like the new stuff anyway. They don't like Marvel. They don't like Star Wars. By the way, that's stuff that's not going to get sold. Like, that stuff is way too valuable. But they would probably sell the streaming services. They would probably get out of Disney Plus, which I'm kind of two minds on that one, but we won't get into why now. They'd probably get rid of the TV networks. They would probably sell the parks to some third-party company like Carnival or Six Flags, and that would be really bad for the parks. I know that some people look at like the Oriental Land Company running Disney Tokyo and how little that gets upgraded. It's like, oh, you see, that's what I would like. I would like Disneyland to never change. But you have to also keep in mind that Tokyo Disneyland is not like a premium tourist attraction over in Japan. It's something that's there, but it's not like it's a huge draw for a lot of the locals. It's just busy enough to make money. And in America, that doesn't fly. Like, you have to constantly add to the parks. You have to change the parks. You have to grow the parks. And a third-party buyer might not be interested in that. If you look at the improvements and the maintenance that Disney does with their parks compared to what Cedar Fair does with Knott's Berry Farm, for example, or what many of the Six Flags locations, you can see a difference in Disney, and that's because Disney has a different philosophy that another buyer might not have. But this is what Nelson Peltz wants to do. And by the way, if he breaks up the company, sells it to pieces, there's no guarantee those old shorts and movies and Disneyland episodes will wind up on DVD or something like that. It's just not a guarantee. And Disney still makes a lot of stuff that it's like, I get a little annoyed when people say only the first 2 years of Iger was good. It's like, really? You don't like Encanto? You don't like Frozen? You don't like Big Hero 6? You don't like Tangled? You don't like Toy Story 3? I'm sorry. There's a lot of great stuff that happened under Iger. Of course, we also had John Lasseter during some of the best years, but not going to get into that right now. So here's the thing. This fight's going on, and Bob Iger has received some support from the Disney family. And he received 2 letters, basically from both sides of the Disney family. Because, believe it or not, the Disney family is kind of split into 2 factions. There's the Walt side of the family and the Roy side of the family. And if you want to know more about that, read Disney War by James Stewart. You can read a lot about how the Disney family is kind of split into 2. But the Walt side of the family wrote a letter to the board and to the shareholders, actually. And they wrote, "To the shareholders of the Walt Disney Company. As the family of Walt Disney, we support the Walt Disney Company management and its board of directors and oppose the nominations put forth by Nelson Peltz. The integrity in the name of Walt Disney has always been a priority to our family. Our mother, Diane Disney Miller, Walt's eldest daughter, created the Walt Disney Family Museum to ensure that the history of her father's life and those involved in the creation of his dreams would be honored and remembered. We still believe in this brand of integrity and storytelling. Bob Iger has grown this company in a modern world, and he continues to maintain a balance of creativity and profit. It is still a company based on the desire to entertain and explore. There have been challenging times, but this current management has adjusted and grown through those challenges. We are never without gratitude and pride for our grandfather, and being a part of this family, we will always cherish the memories and the life that we had with him. With this gratitude, it matters to us what the company does and how Walt Disney is represented. As such, we support Bob Iger and the Walt Disney Company Board. Sincerely, Walter Elias Disney Miller, Tamara Diane Miller, Jennifer Miller Goff, and Joanna Sharon Miller. So that's the letter from the Walt Disney side of the family. Now, there is a second letter from the Roy Disney side of the family, which is an open letter to the shareholders, of which I am one of them, by the way. I've actually got a lot of Disney stock. And here, theirs is a little longer, but here's what it says. As the grandchildren of Roy O. Disney, we grew up with a front row seat to the magic that fuels the remarkable company he and his brother Walt Disney built together. We spent our childhoods on the studio lot watching movies get made. We explored Disneyland with the creative geniuses behind the happiest place on earth. We saw the passion Walt and Roy had for creating lifelong memories for children and families, and the infectious joy they got out of the work they did. From Mickey and Minnie to Snow White and Mary Poppins, Disney is not a company that makes widgets. It makes magic. On a side note, the fact that they wrote that means that they haven't been paying that much attention to the Disney company recently, but let's continue. And it takes a special group of leaders with a deep respect and understanding for this tradition to develop the kind of incredible experiences, whether in a theme park, at a movie theater, or in your own home, that touch people's hearts. Bob Iger, his management team, and the board of directors are faithful to this magic. They understand that the longevity of the Walt Disney Company isn't only the result of smart business decisions. It is rooted in the strong emotional connection Disney continues to forge with generations of people from around the globe. We may not agree about everything, but we know that our grandfather would be especially proud of what Disney means to the world today. On a side note, I think that's true. Despite the things that we disagree with and how we don't feel that Walt's legacy is being, preserved the way it should be, I do think that if Walt woke up and he looked at how much people loved the parks and stuff, he probably would be very proud. But let's continue. They haven't made any arguments for why they should be entrusted with the keys to the kingdom our family. Oh, sorry, I skipped this couple sentences. We know that, like us, he would be very concerned by the threat posed by self-anointed activist investors who are really wolves in sheep's clothing, just waiting to tear Disney apart if they can trick shareholders into opening the door for them. What concerns us most about these hedge fund-backed opportunists is that they have little to no knowledge of what Disney truly means to people like you. They haven't made any arguments for why they should be entrusted with the keys to the kingdom or our family built. To the contrary, their I alone can fix it mentality makes clear they are not interested in preserving the Disney magic, but stripping it to the bone to make a quick profit for themselves. We're old enough to remember the bitter episode 4 decades ago when another corporate raider, Saul Steinberg, who, as it so happens, was good friends with one of the current activists, Nelson Peltz, launched a hostile takeover attempt of Disney and threatened to break apart the company. He was defeated, much as these activists must be defeated today. This is not a company of interchangeable parts. It is home to thousands and thousands of dedicated employees who share the same passion Walt and Roy have for bringing hope and happiness to people through the magic of storytelling. Disney is lucky to be led by people who are looking to the future while drawing guidance from our cherished past. As the Walt Disney Company charts its path forward, it is imperative that the strategy Bob Iger, his management team, and the board of directors have implemented is not disrupted by those motivated by nothing more than their own self-interest. Disney stories are filled with heroes and villains. We know who the villains are in this story, and we know they cannot be entrusted with protecting this company's rich legacy or guiding its bright future. Sincerely, Roy P. Disney, Susan Disney Lord, Tim Disney, and in the biggest surprise, Abigail E. Disney. Now then, let me state something up front. There is a reason that you should pay attention to these people's opinions. Because a lot of people have said that the Disney family has not been very much involved with the company for decades. And this is true. And Abigail Disney, who I'm definitely going to be touching on in this podcast, don't worry, has been especially egregious and hostile towards Disney fans. because she has actually called her uncle, well, pretty much a fascist, and that her father was racist and things like that. And if it was up to her, all that rich Disney history would be burned to the ground. Like, she wanted Splash Mountain rethemed long before anyone else did. She wanted movies like Cinderella and The Jungle Book put in a vault, never to be seen again. So, yeah, she's not exactly someone who cares too much about the Disney company's history or legacy. But you know what? Do you know what these people do care about? Money. They care about money, because the reason these people are billionaires is because of their shares in Disney stock, the millions of dollars that they have received in dividends through the stock programs. Like, these people are rich because of Disney. And when they look at the situation, what they see with these activist investors is that the company is going to go under. These activist investors do not care about keeping Disney around. They don't care about preserving the legacy. They don't care about anything but breaking the studio up and selling it for parts. And at that point, there would be no Disney. Disney would essentially become like Atari. It's a name. It exists. Somebody owns that name. But Atari is not relevant to anyone that doesn't care about those old retro video games. They just don't. If that happens, the Disney family's way of life goes away. Now, why should we care whether their way of life goes away or not? Because if you are a fan of Disney and you enjoy going to the theme parks and you enjoy the Disney channels and you enjoy the shows that Disney produces like Phineas and Ferb and some of the most recent stuff that they do, if your kids love Mickey's Playhouse, I think that's what it's called, if you like any of this stuff, it goes away. It winds up as paper scraps. And maybe someone just releases the old stuff, but personally, I believe that Disney will create great movies again. Because this is not the first lull that they've had. There were the dark ages of Disney animation where movies like The Black Cauldron were being made, and The Fox and the Hound, movies that are probably fine, but they're not great. And I really don't like Robin Hood. But then they come back, and it's Beauty and the Beast, and it's The Lion King, and then they have another lull. They have Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, Fantasia 2000, movies that I really love, by the way. But there's no denying that they didn't do at the box office what they could have done. Brother Bear was fairly average. Home on the Range. Home on the Range did not have a leg to stand on. Chicken Little and Meet the Robinsons. Oh my gosh. Meet the Robinsons isn't too bad, but Chicken Little's terrible. But then what happens? We get Tangled. We have Princess Frog. We have Frozen. We have Zootopia. I mean, it's like another renaissance. So yeah, Wish wasn't great, admittingly. But we will get there again at some point. But we need a Disney company to be running to get to that point again. And we need a Disney company that has the resources that Disney has to preserve the legacy of Disney. Now, here's the thing. You have to keep in mind, even if Disney is not doing much with their legacy, and I am not okay with that. There is room to do both the new and the old. That is definitely a frustration that is valid. But you know what? I know people who work for Disney, and they are doing 4K restorations of all their archive material. Do you see Warner Brothers doing that? No, and Warner Brothers actually has a Warner Archive Collection physical media department whose job it is to release old movies, and even they aren't that invested in their history. Heck, a lot of it's probably being written off as a tax write-off now by their idiot CEO. I had to hold myself back from cursing because I do not like that guy. And Abigail Disney, now she gets special mention in this podcast because the funny thing is that Abigail Disney is truly a hypocrite with no morals. And that's one of the reasons why this letter is being dismissed by the Iger haters. Now, I've had conversations with people, not one person, multiple people, where Abigail Disney she is a very, very big critic of Bob Iger. She and the guy do not get along. Heck, she directed a movie about how much Bob Iger sucks when it comes to paying his cast members. She's not a fan of Bob Iger. And the funny thing is, I know people who like her because she doesn't like Bob Iger, but when I tell them about, like, you know, she's one of the people who, like, if she had her way, you would never see those classic animated Disney movies ever again. And it's like, well, yeah, but she hates Bob Iger, so therefore I like it. It's like, no, this is where some nuance is needed. Abigail Disney hates Bob Iger, and she doesn't like him, and she is profiting off her activism against him. But even she sees that if this activist investor gets a hold of the board and actually spreads, the company could die. And it's not like she's doing anything that's going to make up the money for what her Disney shares are going to bring in. That's why she's throwing in with Bob Iger right now. And here's a reality that all Disney fans just need to understand about this whole situation. This is not about legacy. This is not about who would be a better CEO. This is not about any of that. This is about money. This is why when they need to save their jobs, Iger pulls out the Disney family to write open letters to the shareholders and uses Ludwig von Drake in a shareholder meeting to convince the average Disney fans to vote for him. And because the activist investors may very well tear this company apart and sell it and it would be no more, the Disney family clearly have a vested interest in siding with Bob Iger. So this is all about money. Follow the money, you find out where all of this is going. Now, from my perspective as a shareholder, I'm going to vote to keep Bob Iger. Begrudgingly, admittingly. I don't really want to do that. But in this case, he's better than Nelson Peltz. So I got to do it. I really hope that the shareholders have a say. I'd like to see Kevin Mayer as the CEO of Disney. I think he would be a wonderful Disney CEO. Maybe even Tom Staggs. But that's the way this is right now. Until 2026. We're going to have Iger, especially since I don't actually think the shareholders are going to vote him out. But that is where we're going to end this episode. This was kind of a long one. I rambled quite a bit on this one. So if you're watching this on YouTube or one of the platforms that has comments available, I'd like to hear your comments on this whole situation. What you think about it. If you're a shareholder, how would you be voting? And if you are listening to this on a podcast platform and you enjoyed it and you would like to hear more, well, let's make it official. Subscribe. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Deezer, whatever podcast platform, we are most likely on it. And as always, have a great day. I'll see you at the movies.